My name is Winona Red Elk, and I'm a Lakota Ranger at Badlands National Park. This land, it's more than just a place to me. It's in my blood, in my history, in the very rhythm of my heart. My ancestors walked these same trails, hunted these same lands, and felt the same wind on their faces. But there's a darkness here, something ancient and powerful, something that predates even my people. We knew about it, we respected it, we lived alongside it, but the outsiders, they don't understand. They never understand. We called them the Silent Watchers. The old ones, my grandmother, her grandmother, they spoke of them in hushed tones, stories shared around the fire, warnings whispered on the wind. They're carved into the rocks, these ancient figures, faces without mouths, eyes that seem to follow you wherever you go. They are not just carvings, they're vessels, gateways to something else, something that exists beyond our understanding. The Watchers, they see all, they hear all, they remember, and they judge. They are the guardians of this land, the silent keepers of its sacred secrets. They do not speak, they do not move, but they are always present, always watching. The Park Service, they came with their plans, their blueprints, their ideas of progress. They built their roads, their overlooks, their picnic areas. They disturbed the sacred balance. They ignored the warnings. They disrespected the land. They brought in crowds, noise, disrespect. They turned this place, a sanctuary, a sacred burial ground, into a tourist attraction. They came, they saw, but they never understood. They never learned to listen. I remember the first time I saw them, not just the carvings, but the real ones. It was during a late evening patrol, the sun setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the buttes. I was rounding a bend, the wind whipping through the canyons, the silence broken only by the crunch of my boots on the gravel path. And there, standing atop a distant ridge, were the figures, tall and shadowy. I thought it was a trick of the Obana light, the play of shadows against the rocks. But as I watched, they became clearer, more defined. They were not rocks. They were not shadows. They were there, as they had always been, waiting. They blend in with the rock, their forms almost indistinguishable from the rugged terrain, but once you see them, you can't unsee them. They're always there, always watching, perched atop the buttes, standing beside the canyons, lurking in the shadows. Their forms are human-like, but they are not humans. They are something else, something ancient and powerful, something that has been here since the beginning of time. They are still, they are unmoving, they are completely silent, but their presence is palpable, the weight of their gaze like a heavy hand on my soul. I've tried to tell the visitors, to warn them to be respectful, to stay on the trails, to not take anything from the park. I've tried to explain the importance of the silence, the sacred nature of this place. But they don't listen. They think it's all just folklore, an old tale told by a superstitious ranger. They take rocks as souvenirs. They leave trash. They shout and laugh, disturbing the silence that has stood for so long. They wander off the trails, they trample the plants, they dig into the ground. They're like children who don't know better, but their ignorance is not an excuse here. They don't understand that they are not just disrespecting the land. They are disrespecting the Watchers. They are waking something that should remain asleep. And the Watchers, they see it all. Every act of disrespect, every violation of the sacred balance. They remember every transgression, every act of ignorance, and they judge. And their judgment, it is not kind. I've seen the accidents, the falls, the sudden illnesses. The Park Service calls them random incidents, bad luck. But I know better. I've seen the fear in their eyes, the way they stumble and fall as if an unseen force is pushing them down, leading them to their misfortune. They are not just accidents. They are consequences, the results of the Watcher's ire. It's not bad luck. It's judgment, a harsh retribution for the desecration of this sacred ground. The Watchers are not merciful. Their ways are ancient and uncompromising, and they show no pity to those who violate their domain. I carry a small pouch of sage with me, a gift from my grandmother. She said it would protect me from the Watchers, that its scent would ward off evil spirits, that its smoke would cleanse my soul. But even the sage, It feels like a hollow comfort. Now, I don't think anything can protect us anymore. The balance is tipped, the damage is done, the watchers are awake, and their judgment is unavoidable. I've seen the signs, the subtle shifts in the natural world, the sudden gusts of wind that whip through the canyons, the way the animals retreat into the shadows. I can feel the darkness growing, the weight of the watcher's presence becoming heavier with each passing day. I feel it in my heart, a sense of foreboding that chills me to the bone. I know that my time here is coming to an end. I'm leaving the Badlands. I can't watch this happen anymore. I can't stand to see more of my people being hurt by the arrogance of the outsiders, by the actions of those who do not understand, those who refuse to see. I can't bear to be present when the watchers make their final move. I have to get out, and I urge you to do the same. I'm urging you, stay away. Stay away from this park. The watchers are judging, and their judgment is harsh. Do not become another victim. Do not be another sacrifice. Leave this land to its ancient keepers, and perhaps, just perhaps, they will find peace. Being a Lakota Ranger at Badlands National Park is more than just a job. It's a part of my identity, a responsibility that I carry with the weight of generations. My grandmother, she was a medicine woman, a keeper of the old ways, and she taught me to listen to the land, to understand its rhythms, to respect its power. She always said that the Badlands were a living being, a place of ancient secrets and untamed energies, and that we, as Lakota people, were its guardians. She taught me the stories, the legends, the warnings passed down through generations, and she instilled in me a deep connection to the spirit of this place. I grew up with the tales of the silent watchers, these ancient beings carved into the rock faces, the protectors of this sacred land. But it was more than just stories. It was our history. It was the way we understood the world and our place in it. We never feared them. We respected them. We acknowledged their power, and we tried our best to live in harmony with them. We knew that the Badlands were not just a place of natural beauty, but a place of great spiritual significance, a place to be respected and revered. There is a contradiction within me, a constant struggle between the modern world and the ancient ways, a conflict that I face every day. I wear the uniform of a park ranger. I follow the rules and regulations of the Park Service, but I know that those rules, those regulations, they're not enough to protect this place from the forces that are at play. I speak the language of the outsiders, I navigate their systems, but my heart beats to the rhythm of the old ways, to the wisdom of my ancestors. It is a difficult path to walk, one where the two worlds are often at odds, each pulling me in different directions. I have seen the changes, the slow erosion of the sacred balance, the way the park has become a mere destination for tourists, a place to take pictures, to check off a bucket list. It breaks my heart to see the disrespect, the ignorance, the blatant disregard for the spirit of this place. And I know that every act of disrespect, every violation of the sacred laws, makes the watchers more restless, more angry, their judgment more unavoidable. My heart aches for my ancestors, for the beautiful sacred places that are being desecrated. The other rangers, they see the park differently. They see it as a place of natural beauty, a place to be managed and maintained, a place to be enjoyed. They don't understand the spiritual significance of this land. They don't feel the presence of the watchers. They don't hear the whispers of the ancient ones. They see me as the local, the person who knows the history, the person who is in touch with nature. But they don't really understand my struggle, the weight of the responsibility that I carry. My grandmother, she always warned me about the outsiders, their insatiable curiosity, their disrespect for the things they did not understand. She said that they would come to this place, and that they would disturb the balance, and that the watchers would awaken. She said that I would have to be the one to protect it, to stand against the darkness, even if it meant sacrificing myself. And now I see her warnings becoming reality. She was a wise woman, and I miss her dearly, especially now that I feel so alone. I've tried to be the bridge between the two worlds, to educate the tourists, to explain the importance of respect and reverence, but my words often fall on deaf ears. They see me as a curiosity, as an exotic figure, a living relic of our past. They ask me questions about my culture, they take pictures of me in my uniform, but they don't really listen to what I have to say. They are more interested in the image than the story, more focused on the destination than on the journey. They do not understand that the journey itself is part of the sacred teachings. There was one tourist, a young man who came to the park last summer. He was different. He seemed to be more than just a casual visitor. He seemed to be seeking something deeper. He asked me about the Watchers, about the old legends, about the spiritual significance of the Badlands. I told him what my grandmother had taught me, and for once, someone seemed to listen. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss my words as folklore. He seemed to understand, and I dared to hope, for just a moment, that maybe there was still hope, that maybe not everyone was blind to the truth. But even he, even the one who seemed to understand, he eventually succumbed to the allure of the modern world. He left the park, he went back to his life, and I never heard from him again. He went back to his own world, just like the others, and I was left here, alone with my fears, with the knowledge of the impending darkness, and the slow realization that my efforts were for naught. The scales were tipped, and now the consequences were arriving with frightening speed. I realize now that my hope had always been misplaced. I had always believed that I could make a difference, that I could somehow protect the Badlands from the darkness that was creeping in. But now I see that I was wrong. The Watchers are awake, they are judging, and their judgment is inevitable. And all I can do now is try to warn others, to make sure that they do not become another victim, that they do not become another sacrifice. And even that feels like an empty endeavor. The signs became more frequent, more disturbing. The accidents were no longer isolated incidents. They were becoming a daily occurrence. Tourists were falling off trails, stumbling over seemingly flat ground, succumbing to sudden illnesses that baffled the park's medical staff. The atmosphere in the Badlands had changed. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy and oppressive, pregnant with a growing sense of dread. I could feel the Watchers' anger intensifying, their presence becoming more and more palpable with each passing day. It was as if they were no longer content to watch. They were actively interfering, and their judgment was becoming increasingly severe. I tried to speak to the park superintendent, to explain what was happening, to warn him of the impending danger. But he dismissed my concerns. He called me superstitious. He said that I was letting my cultural beliefs interfere with my professional judgment. He refused to see the truth. He refused to acknowledge the power of the Watchers. He was blinded by his own arrogance, by his own belief in the superiority of the modern world. I was no longer just a ranger. I was an inconvenience, a hurdle in the way of progress. He told me that my job was to enforce the rules of the park, to ensure the safety of the visitors, not to propagate old wives' tales. He said that the Park Service was committed to protecting the natural resources of the Badlands, but that they were also obligated to provide recreational opportunities to the public. He could not see the hypocrisy in his own words, the contradiction between the park's mission and its actual effects. He was one of the many who refused to see the truth. I felt a deep sense of despair, a feeling that I was fighting a losing battle, that my efforts were futile. I was surrounded by ignorance, by arrogance, by a blatant disregard for the sacredness of this place. I was torn between my duty as a ranger and my loyalty to my ancestors, between my desire to protect this land and my understanding that I could not do it alone. It was a moral dilemma that haunted me every waking hour, the knowledge that inaction was just as dangerous as any actions I might make. I started spending more time alone in the park, searching for answers, seeking guidance. From the ancient stones, the whispering winds, the silent buttes, I would sit for hours on the edge of the canyons, listening to the voice of the land, trying to decipher the meaning of the strange events that were taking place. I felt a growing sense of urgency, a feeling that time was running out, that the Watcher's judgment was coming, and that the consequences would be devastating. I noticed that the animals were behaving strangely. The deer had retreated into the deepest parts of the canyons. The birds were silent. The prairie dogs had abandoned their burrows. The natural world was reacting to the changes in the Badlands, the subtle tremors in the delicate balance that had been so painstakingly established over the millennia. I realized that the Watcher's influence was not limited to just the visitors. The entire ecosystem was suffering, and that was perhaps the most terrifying realization of all. One afternoon I was patrolling a remote area of the park when I came across a group of tourists. They were gathered around one of the ancient carvings of the Watchers. They were touching it, they were taking pictures of it, they were laughing, unaware of the danger they were in. I approached them, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anger. I told them to stop. I told them to respect the sacredness of this place. I told them to leave the Watchers alone. But they ignored me. They continued to touch, to laugh, to desecrate, and one of the tourists even chipped a piece of rock off the carving, claiming he wanted a souvenir. I felt a wave of nausea. I knew that they had sealed their fate, that the Watchers would not forgive this act of blatant disrespect. And I saw it, a subtle shift in the shadows, the subtle movement of a figure perched atop a distant butte. It was the Watchers. They had seen it all. I tried to warn them, but my words were drowned out by their laughter. And I knew I had failed, not just as a ranger, but as a protector, as a descendant of those who had cared for this land for centuries. That night, a storm swept through the Badlands. The wind howled like a banshee. The lightning cracked across. The sky and the rain lashed down with a fury I had never witnessed before. The park was plunged into darkness. The power lines had gone down, and I was trapped in my cabin, surrounded by the chaos of the storm, listening to the screams of the wind. I knew that something terrible was happening. I could feel it. The Watchers. Power had been unleashed. The next morning, the storm had subsided, but the park was in ruins. The trails were washed out, the visitor center was flooded, and many of the overlooks were destroyed. And I saw the bodies scattered across the park, tourists who had been caught in the storm, tourists who had been judged by the Watchers and who had suffered the consequences of their disrespect. It was a scene of devastation, a chilling reminder of the power of nature and the wrath of the ancient ones. It was then that I realized I was not going to be able to save anyone, not even myself. My only option was to get out and to warn others about the danger that lay in the Badlands. I could no longer carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. I had to accept that my time was over. I knew that the Watchers would not be appeased, that their anger was too great, that their judgment was inevitable, and that there was nothing I could do to stop it. The choice had been taken away from me. I was leaving, and that was final. As I prepared to leave the Badlands, my mind raced with memories, with fragments of my past that seemed to be trying to tell me something, to warn me about something I had missed. I remembered my grandmother, her gentle touch, her wise eyes, her stories about the silent Watchers, the ancient spirits that guarded this land. She always said that the Watchers were more than just carvings, that they were the embodiment of the land spirit, the silent witnesses to our actions, the keepers of our collective memory. She used to say that they had their own ways of keeping, the balance that they would show no mercy to those who desecrated the sacred ground. And it was then that I understood I should have listened to her more. I remembered the times when I was a child, exploring the Badlands with my grandmother, learning about the plants, the animals, the history of this place. She would tell me stories about the Lakota people, about our connection to the land, about the importance of respecting nature. She taught me the old ways, the traditional songs, the ancient ceremonies, and she always emphasized the power of the silence, the wisdom that could be found in the stillness of the natural world. She was trying to prepare me, but I had not listened, too focused on the world of the outsiders to notice the true warning in her stories. And now I understood. The story of the Watchers was not just a legend, but a living truth that had become part of my life. I remembered a specific story, a tale about a group of Lakota warriors who had once defied the Watchers. They had tried to take something from the land that was not theirs, and the Watchers had punished them severely. They had been turned to stone, their bodies forever frozen in time, their spirits forever bound to the Badlands. My grandmother said that this was a warning, a reminder of the consequences of disrespect, of the danger of hubris, and that the modern people were making the same mistakes, and that their end would be just as violent and just as definitive. I also thought about the young tourist, the one who had seemed to understand, the one who had asked me about the Watchers, about the old legends. I had hoped that he was the exception, that he was someone who could see past the surface, who could understand the spiritual significance of this place. But even he had proven to be just another outsider, another traveler who would leave, who would forget, who would ultimately fail to respect the sacred land. I felt a deep sense of betrayal, not of him, but of myself. My heart was not strong enough to make them understand, and now it was too late to change it. I remembered that he had taken a photograph of the carvings. He had asked me if he could take a picture, and I had said yes, thinking that it was just another innocuous act of curiosity. I should have known better. I should have realized that he was taking something from the land, that he was disrespecting the Watchers in his own way. And it was then that the real tragedy of my situation became clear. It was not just about the tourists, it was about all of us, about all those who had lost their connection to the land, who had forgotten the old ways, who had turned a deaf ear to the voices of the past. As I packed my bags, I found a small, leather-bound journal, a gift from my grandmother. It was filled with her writings, with her observations, with her insights into the mysteries of the Badlands. I had never really read it before, too focused on the present, on the immediate challenges, on the external world. I started to browse through the pages, and it was like her voice was speaking to me, guiding me, warning me about the imminent danger that was coming. She had known all along, she had seen the future, she had understood the inevitability of the Watcher's judgment. She had written about the importance of respecting the silence, of honoring the ancient spirits, of listening to the land. She had emphasized the power of the sage, the healing properties of the plants, the ancient songs and ceremonies, and the importance of staying true to our traditions. She had written that the key to survival was not to fight the darkness, but to understand it, to respect it, to find a way to live in harmony with it. She was trying to help me, to show me a different path, a path that I had refused to see in all. One of the last entries, she had written that the Watchers were not inherently evil. They were the embodiment of balance, the guardians of the natural order. She had said that their judgment was not an act of malice, but an act of necessity, a way to restore the balance that had been broken by the actions of the outsiders. It was a powerful truth, a deeply unsettling realization that I had not been able to embrace fully. And now, as I looked back on all of the warnings, the subtle clues, and the signs of the Watchers' unrest, I realized that I had been living in denial for far too long. The wind outside was picking up. The sky was turning a strange shade of gray, and the air was heavy with a growing sense of unease. I knew that I could not stay here any longer, that the Watchers were coming, and that my time in the Badlands had come to an end. My grandmother's teachings were finally making sense, but too late. The threads were all coming together, and it was clear that the path I was on was not going to lead anywhere positive. My only option was to warn everyone else, and hopefully avoid the total devastation that was coming to the Badlands. The Badlands themselves seemed to be reacting to my impending departure, the landscape shifting and changing as if mirroring my own inner turmoil. The wind howled through the canyons, creating eerie sounds that seemed to whisper ancient secrets, and the shadows stretched and twisted, taking on grotesque shapes that seemed to watch my every move. The sky was a canvas of bruised purple and angry gray, a visual representation of the impending storm, a reflection of the Watchers' growing wrath. The very earth beneath my feet felt unstable, as if the Badlands themselves were trying to swallow me whole, to keep me from leaving. I packed my belongings into my old Jeep, my hands trembling, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resignation. I looked back at the ranger station, at the small cabin that had been my home for so many years, and I felt a strange sense of sadness, a feeling that I was leaving a part of myself behind. The cabin, once a symbol of safety and security, now felt like a trap, a place where I had failed to fulfill my duty, where I had become a silent witness to the slow destruction of the sacred balance. The memories flooded my mind, the good, the bad, the beautiful, the tragic. And it was then that I truly felt the weight of my failure. As I turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtered and died. I tried again, but the Jeep remained, silent, refusing to start. I felt a surge of panic, a feeling that I was being held back, that I was not meant to leave. I tried to remain calm. I tried to rationalize the situation, telling myself that it was just a mechanical problem. But deep down, I knew that something else was happening, that the watchers were not going to let me go so easily. I stepped out of the Jeep and I looked around. The landscape seemed to be pulsating. The buttes were casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move independently of the sun, and the air was thick with a strange, almost electric charge. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy and oppressive, as if the very air was waiting, as if the whole world was holding its breath. And then it started. The carvings of the watchers began to glow with an eerie light, their eyes burning with an unnatural intensity, and the ground beneath my feet began to tremble, not like an earthquake, but like the slow, deliberate movement of something enormous, something ancient, something that was waking up from a very long sleep. They were coming. They had finally decided that their time had come. I saw them then, not just the carvings, but the real ones, their forms slowly emerging from the rocks, from the shadows, from the very essence of the Badlands. They were tall, shadowy figures, with faces that were devoid of expression, their eyes burning with a cold, unwavering light. They were silent, unmoving, but their presence was overwhelming, the weight of their gaze like a physical blow. They were more than just protectors. They were more than just judges. They were the very embodiment of the Badlands themselves, and it was clear that they were not going to let me leave. I felt a strange sense of calm, a feeling that the struggle was over, that the inevitable had finally arrived. The fear that had consumed me began to recede, replaced by a sense of acceptance, a feeling that I had reached the end of my journey. It was as if I had finally understood my role in all of this, that my purpose was not to protect the Badlands, but to witness its final act, to bear witness to the judgment of the Watchers. But then something unexpected happened. I saw one of the Watchers move, not with a physical movement, but with a subtle shift of its presence, as if it was turning towards me, as if it was acknowledging my existence. And then I felt it, a strange sensation, a feeling that it was trying to communicate with me, not through words, but through images, through visions that flooded my mind, not as a memory, but as a living truth. And it was then that I understood. It was all a lie. The visions showed me the true origins of the Watchers. They were not ancient spirits of the land. They were not guardians of a sacred balance. They were something else entirely, something that had arrived on Earth long ago, something alien and parasitic, something that had been using the energy of the Badlands, the energy of our fear, to grow stronger, to gain power. They weren't trying to preserve anything. They were trying to consume everything. And the carving, the ones my people thought were a symbol of respect, they were beacons, markers for the parasitic entity to find a way to feed itself and grow. The fear, the ignorance, the disrespect, it had all been part of their plan, and we had been playing their game from the beginning. And I understood. My grandmother's stories, the legends of the Lakota people, they were not the truth. They were a carefully constructed narrative, a way for the Watchers to control us, to keep us in a state of fear, to feed on our energy. It was not that my people were wrong, but that their understanding had been manipulated. Their truth had been distorted. The Watchers had been using us, had been preying on us since the beginning of time, and I, as a descendant of the Lakota, had been a pawn in their game. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, the knowledge that everything I had believed, everything I had held sacred, was nothing but a lie. My hands trembled, my breath came in short, ragged gasps, and a cold wave of nausea washed over me. The world seemed to spin, the landscape twisting and distorting, the figures of the Watchers looming larger, their presence more menacing. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the heavy silence of the Badlands, and a wave of pure, unadulterated fear coursed through me, a fear that was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It was not the fear of the unknown, but the fear of the known, the fear of understanding the terrible truth. My initial reaction was disbelief, a refusal to accept the reality of what I had seen, what I had felt. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that it was just a hallucination, a product of my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew that it was real, that the Watchers were not who they seemed, and that my entire life had been built on a lie. The anger began to swell within me, a burning rage directed at the Watchers, at my ancestors, at myself for being so blind, for being so easily manipulated. I looked around at the landscape that had always been my refuge, my sanctuary, and I saw it with new eyes, with a newfound understanding of its true nature. The Badlands were not a place of ancient wisdom. They were a feeding ground, a carefully constructed trap designed to keep us in a state of fear, to provide the Watchers with the energy they needed to survive. The very rocks that had been carved with the image of the Watchers now seemed like mocking smiles, twisted symbols of a terrible deception. The wind was no longer whispering secrets. It was a scream of eternal torment, the voice of countless souls that had been consumed by the sore, ancient parasite. The figures of the Watchers began to move, their tall, shadowy forms gliding through the landscape, their eyes fixed on me with an unwavering intensity. I felt a pull, a subtle but powerful force that seemed to be drawing me towards them, and I realized that they were not going to let me leave, that I was meant to be part of their harvest. It was not a fight that I could win. I was at their mercy, and the final act was finally upon me. I thought of my grandmother, her teachings, her stories, her love. A tear escaped my eye, hot and painful against the cold wind. I realized that she had been trying to protect me, that she had known the truth, but that she had also been powerless to stop it. She had tried to instill in me the strength to resist, but in the end, it had not been enough. I had failed her. I had failed my people. I had failed the Badlands themselves. But even in the face of this overwhelming despair, a spark of defiance ignited within me, a refusal to surrender, a decision to fight back, even if it was just for a moment. I reached for the small pouch of sage that my grandmother had given me, the pouch that I had once believed could protect me from the Watchers. I knew now that it was not enough, but I also knew that it was all that I had left. A symbolic gesture of resistance, a desperate attempt to hold on to something from the past. I opened the pouch, the scent of sage filling the air, and I took a handful of the dried leaves. I held them in my hand. I felt a surge of energy, a feeling that was both comforting and invigorating, as if my grandmother's spirit was with me, guiding me, encouraging me to fight. I knew that the Watchers were not going to be defeated with violence, that they were far too powerful, too ancient, too deeply rooted in the very fabric of the Badlands. But I also knew that there was something else that they could not control, something that they could not extinguish, something that lived within me and within my people, a spark of the human spirit, the determination to resist, the will to survive. I started to move, slowly at first, my legs unsteady, my body trembling, but with each step I gained more strength, more resolve. I was not just a ranger, I was not just a descendant of the Lakota people. I was something else, something new, a being born from the ashes of my past, forged in the crucible of betrayal and despair. And I knew that even though I was facing the end, I was not going to go down without a fight. The Watchers surrounded me, their forms looming like grotesque giants against the bruised sky, their silence pressing down on me with the weight of centuries. But as I faced them, a strange calm descended upon me, a sense of clarity that pierced through the fear and despair. I realized that true strength was not about physical power, but about the unwavering spirit, the ability to face the darkness without succumbing to it. The sage in my hand was not a magical shield, but a symbol of my heritage, a reminder of the strength that lived within me, and that even in the face of annihilation, it would remain unbroken. I finally understood that the courage I had sought was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. I had been running, I had been hiding, I had been trying to protect myself from the inevitable. But now, I realized that true freedom was not about escaping the darkness, but about facing it, about understanding it, about finding a way to overcome it, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been hurt by the lies of the Watchers. I closed my eyes, and I breathed in the scent of the sage, letting its essence fill my lungs, letting it awaken the ancient memories, the powerful connection to the land, the indomitable spirit of my ancestors. I was not just Winona Red Elk, the Lakota Ranger. I was a descendant of warriors, of medicine women, of storytellers, of all those who had lived and died in the shadow of the Badlands. And I knew that their strength lived within me, that their courage was now mine. I opened my eyes, my gaze unwavering, my heart filled with a newfound sense of purpose. I raised my hand, the sage held high, and I began to chant, not in the language of the old ceremonies, but in the language of my own spirit, a song of defiance, a melody of rebellion, a cry for justice. The words were not planned, they were not practiced, they were simply the outpouring of my heart, the desperate plea of a soul that was determined to fight, even against impossible odds. And the power that surged through me was not just mine, it was the power of all those who had suffered, all those who had been wronged, all those who had been consumed by the darkness. The Watchers recoiled, their shadowy forms flickering, their eyes dimming as the sound of my chant echoed through the Badlands. They had never faced such resistance, such raw power, such an indomitable spirit. They had fed on our fear, on our ignorance, on our disrespect. But they had never encountered the power of our collective will, the strength of the human heart, and the fierce determination of those who have been wronged. The landscape began to shift, the rocks crumbling, the canyons collapsing, and the very earth beneath me seemed to be shaking with the force of the ancient power that was being unleashed. It was as if the Badlands themselves were reacting to my defiance, as if they were finally shaking off the parasitic grip of the Watchers, as if they were remembering their true nature, their own strength, their own spirit. It was not just a battle that was being fought, it was a liberation, a cleansing, a rebirth. I realized that the key to defeating the Watchers was not to destroy them, but to expose them, to reveal their true nature, to break the chains of their deception. I channeled all of my energy, all of my will, all of the power that coursed through my veins into the sage, and I released it, sending a wave of light that washed over the Badlands, a light that pierced through the darkness, that revealed the Watchers for what they truly were, parasitic entities that had been feeding on our fear, on our ignorance, on our disrespect. Their disguise had fallen, and their true forms, grotesque and terrifying, were now visible to all. The Watchers screamed, a sound that was both terrifying and pitiful, a cry of pain and frustration, and they began to retreat, their shadowy forms fading, their eyes dimming, their power waning. The Badlands, once a place of fear and despair, now began to heal, the colors returning to the landscape, the animals emerging from their hiding places, the silence becoming a peaceful whisper, a promise of a new dawn. My actions had changed everything, and I finally understood the true meaning of my journey. I had not just fought for myself, I had fought for everyone. I felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling that I had finally found my purpose, that I had finally understood the lessons that the Badlands had been trying to teach me. I was not the same person that I had been when I entered this place. I was something else, something more. I had grown, I had evolved, I had become the protector that I was always meant to be. The photograph was not just a picture, it was a key, a map to the heart of the Watcher's power. It revealed a hidden canyon, a place that was not marked on any map, a place that was shrouded in an unnatural silence, a place where the very air seemed to vibrate with a strange, unsettling energy. The young tourist, his name was David, looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. And I knew that we had to go there, that we had to face the final challenge, that we had to confront the true source of the darkness that had corrupted the Badlands. We followed the path, guided by the image in the photograph, and the closer we got to the hidden canyon, the more intense the feeling of unease became. The landscape twisted and distorted, the shadows seemed to writhe, and the silence was almost deafening. It was as if we were entering another world, a dimension that existed outside of time and space, and it was there, in the depths of this unnatural place, that we finally confronted the true enemy. It was not a creature, not a monster, not even a spirit. It was something else entirely. It was a vast, pulsating network of parasitic energy, a web of darkness that had spread throughout the Badlands, feeding on our fears, on our ignorance, on our disrespect. It was the source, the heart, the core of the Watcher's power, a being that was both ancient and alien, both terrifying and pathetic. And in that moment I realized that the Watchers were not the enemy. They were just the puppets, the tools of a far more insidious power. The true enemy was the darkness itself. The network pulsed and throbbed, its energy crackling through the air, and it reached out to us, trying to ensnare us in its web, trying to consume our minds, our bodies, our souls. It was a battle not of physical strength, but of willpower, of spirit, of the courage to stand against the infinite void of the darkness. We held on to each other, drawing strength from our connection, from our shared purpose, from the ancient wisdom that was imprinted upon our hearts, and we channeled all our energy into the task at hand. We began to chant, our voices intertwining, not with words but with emotions, with hope, with love, with a fierce determination to reclaim the Badlands. The very air vibrated with the intensity of our song, and the network recoiled, its energy sputtering, its darkness dimming, as it felt the full force of the human spirit, the unbreakable will to be free, the indomitable light that lives within us all. The network started to dissolve, breaking into pieces, disappearing from existence. It was as if the truth had become a poison to its own deception. But then, in the midst of the chaos, in the throes of the battle, I noticed something else. A faint glimmer of light, a tiny spark of hope that existed at the core of the network, a point of vulnerability that had been hidden by its immense darkness. And it was then that I realized the darkness was not the true enemy. The true enemy was the fear itself, the fear that allowed the darkness to take hold, the fear that had kept us in bondage for so long. And I also realized that I had one last act to play in the ongoing battle for the Badlands. I focused all my energy on that small point of light, and I poured into it my own love, my compassion, my understanding, and in that moment, the network crumbled, its darkness dissolving, and in its place, a beautiful, radiant light emerged, a light that cleansed the Badlands, a light that healed the wounded earth, a light that awakened the true spirit of this place. The Badlands were finally free, and we, as a collective people, were finally free as well. And then everything went quiet. The heavy silence of the darkness was gone, and the gentle whisper of the wind returned to the Badlands. The battle was over. The darkness had been defeated, the ancient deception had been exposed, and the transformation of the Badlands was finally complete. We had faced the true enemy, and we had prevailed, not through violence, not through hatred, but through understanding, through connection, through the power of the human spirit. I had survived, but I was not the same person. My life had changed, my world had changed, and it was time to finally move forward. The aftermath of the battle was a profound peace, a sense of tranquility that settled over the Badlands, as if the land itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The colors returned to the landscape, the animals emerged from their hiding places, and the air was filled with a gentle melody, a song of freedom, a hymn to the beauty of the natural world. The scars of the battle remained, but they were not marks of fear or despair. They were symbols of strength, resilience, and the indomitable power of the human spirit. I understood that our journey was not just about defeating the darkness, but about healing the wounds of the past, about reclaiming our connection to the land, about honoring the wisdom of our ancestors. The Watchers were gone, their power destroyed, their deception exposed, and we, as a collective people, had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. I continued to patrol the Badlands, but not as a ranger who enforced the rules of the park, but as a guardian of this sacred place, a protector of its delicate balance, a keeper of its ancient stories. I had learned to listen to the land, to respect its power, to honor its spirit, and I had also learned the importance of compassion, empathy, and understanding. My transformation had been painful, but it had also been necessary. It had given me a new perspective on life, a deeper understanding of myself, and a renewed sense of purpose. The park was not just a tourist destination, it was a sanctuary, a place of healing, a place of transformation, and I was committed to ensuring that it would remain that way, that the lessons that had been learned through the battle would not be forgotten, and that the truth would always be told. David decided to stay as well, and together we worked to rebuild the Badlands and educate the people of the true meaning of this sacred land. The Badlands had been corrupted, they had been violated, but they had not been destroyed. They had been healed, they had been transformed, they had been reborn. And we, the people who had been touched by the darkness, the people who had chosen to fight for the light, were finally free. We had embraced our humanity, and we had finally learned to be a part of the sacred land, to live alongside it, and not to be its enemy. And it was with that understanding that my journey had finally come to an end. Years have passed since that day, since the battle with the network of darkness, and the Badlands have flourished, their spirit restored, their beauty renewed. The scars of the past have faded, replaced by the vibrant colors of life, the soothing sounds of nature, and the wisdom of a new beginning. I still walk the trails, I still listen to the whispers of the wind, and I still feel the presence of the Watchers, now as guardians of peace, reminders of the power of the human spirit, and it fills my heart with peace. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it has inspired you, given you a new perspective on the power that we all have within us. The world is a complex place, full of light and darkness, and it is our duty to choose the path that we take. Do you have a place that has a hold on you? Let me know in the comments. And now, if you're curious to see what lies beyond the Badlands, click here to see my next story. It's a deep one.